The Crucible and the Salem Witch Trials. The Salem Witch Trials took place in Salem, Massachusetts, and it started in February of 1692 and it ended in May 1693. More than 200 people were accused, and around 20 people were hung in front of the town. How it came about. A group of young girls in Salem claimed to have seen and gone with the devil. Abigail and Elizabeth, who were related to Reverend Parris, started having fits, claiming that a spirit was sent to them and they saw the devil, and they blamed 3 women, claiming they were the ones who made them ill. Part of what drove them to think that they've seen the devil or that the devil was after them was driven by the sermons given by Reverend Parris. It played a big part in this. The sermons he gave were angry and struck fear in the hearts of the people. They weren't uplifting like the sermons you hear in church today. They were negative, and some even stopped attending church because of this. In the trials, they had a special court of oyer and terminer, and those who were accused would appear in front of the court without anyone to defend themselves except for themselves, and they would appear in front of their accusers. And the court was chaotic. The accusers would scream, writhing in pain and claiming it was caused by whoever was on trial. Maybe they saw something like a bird or the devil in the rafters or their astral projection. And that's what was called spectral evidence, and it was pretty damning, and there was virtually no way to have a counter argument against that because only your accusers could see it. The hangings were pretty brutal. When being hung, you'd be hung in front of the town, and you'd have to face your peers and your neighbors just before death. The way they hung witches was a slow and painful process. They pushed them off of a ladder and made them swing. Being hung this way causes you to die slowly as you're being choked and suffocated, instead of a drop where your neck would break. So you're dying a slow, painful death. And if you were not hung or waiting on trial, you'd most likely go crazy in the prison from darkness and hunger, as you had to pay your jailer to get food, water, new bedding, anything. There was even a man named Giles Corey who was pressed to death because he refused to confess. And he really didn't have any witchcraft or anything to confess to. And he was a man of God. He knew it was wrong to lie. The end of the Salem witch trials came about when the governor of the colony finally called an end to the witch hunt after his own wife had been accused of witchcraft. By this time, it was already too late. 20 people were hung, and even 5 died in jail. One man, as you know, of Giles Corey, had been pressed to death. This witch hunt had been taken too far, and it was finally realized when his own wife was accused of witchcraft. It's pretty sad that it took it to hit so close to home for him to put a stop to it. Now we're on to Arthur Miller. He was a 20th century American playwright. He wrote many famous plays and even some short stories. He wrote The Crucible, and at one point, Arthur Miller was accused of communism, which was a big factor and push in writing The Crucible. This is during the 1950s, during the Red Scare, or McCarthyism. And a little fun fact about him, at one point in time, he was married to Marilyn Monroe for about 5 years. The Crucible. Arthur Miller wrote The Crucible kind of due to the fact that he was accused of communism, and he kind of experienced and saw clearly the parallels between the Red Scare and the Salem witch trials. They were kind of wrote and went the same way. If you exposed your co-conspirators or other witches or communists, you would be kind of in the clear. You wouldn't be in so much trouble. And while writing The Crucible, he was fighting to defend his name. Miller, along with many, many Hollywood actors and writers, were accused of communism. Many were even blacklisted. And The Crucible almost seems it was wrote to show just how childish and flimsy these accusations were, as they had no evidence to back them. There wasn't any information or clear evidence to back these accusations. So people are just accusing each other left and right. In McCarthyism, it was also known as the Red Scare and happened during the 1950s when Senator McCarthy was on a witch hunt to find communists. And it was a campaign to seek out communists in the United States government, but often bled through to Hollywood and famous actors and actresses. They were accused of communism and blacklisted. McCarthyism is very similar to the Salem witch trials and the way it was held. Like I said before, if you exposed your co-conspirators, then you were safe. If you were asked who else is a communist and you gave them a name, you would be all right. McCarthyism and The Crucible. You can see many aspects of McCarthyism in The Crucible, because Arthur Miller himself was fighting this test, which is what The Crucible is. It's a test of judgment and honesty, and he remained true and honest and didn't give up. And that's how many died in the Salem witch trials, because they passed the test, and unfortunately it cost them their lives. And history clearly repeated itself, and that is what Arthur is trying to show the world, is that this is happening right in front of our eyes, and we're not even realizing it. And he was motivated to write The Crucible as he fell victim to a witch hunt as well. And here's actually a picture of kind of showing what happened a bit, like what The Crucible is about. And if you look at the bottom of the picture, there's neighbors pointing to each other and accusing one another while their peers are being hanged by the church. Nathaniel Hawthorne. He's pictured here on the right. He's a famous novelist from the early to mid-1800s. His great-grandfather, John Hathorne, was actually a Salem witch trial judge. Nathaniel changed his name from Hathorne to Hawthorne due to his family's reputation, and he felt very guilty about what his grandfather and his family did during the Salem witch trials, because he put innocent men and women to death. And he believed that he would pay for his grandfather's sins. And so he was trying to make up for that in his teachings, in his writing. And his writings are very interesting and tend to make you think a little deeper and gives food for thought and kind of puts this what if in your mind. It makes you ask questions about those around you, about yourself, and can even change the way you look at everything. And he himself was greatly impacted by the trials. Nathaniel Hawthorne was haunted by his family history. He can't get away from it. He even changed his last name so he would not have to bear and share the name of his great-grandfather who sentenced innocent men and women to death by hanging. And Nathaniel's writings could even be looked at as teachings. They could teach a very valuable lesson and change the way you look at the world and even look at your own friends and family and those closest to you. One of his short stories, Young Goodman Brown, it was about a young, newly married man, and he seemed very joyful in the beginning, and he went on a quote-unquote walk, which was a test of faith. And as he was going through the woods, he met the devil. And he was eventually persuaded, per se, and kind of let down by everyone. And he broke down and signed the book and joined the devil and lost his faith in God because he was shown that everyone else was with the devil. And all of his friends, family, and even his wife were with the devil. The only person that he thought he might have seen was his mother, and he just saw possibly a faint shadow of her, which is quite interesting. And if we dig a little deeper and think about this short story, if he was with the devil, maybe he really didn't see everybody. It was just an illusion, and he was tricked, and he failed his test of faith. In the end, he ended up not a happy man. He was unhappy and knew he could no longer trust anyone because everyone he had thought to be a good person that he saw in church, even the minister or the preacher, reverend, whoever it was also with the devil, that everyone was not as it seems. In another short story of his, The Minister's Black Veil, it's another short story of his, and it's a story that was kind of told to show that everyone's got a facade or even like a mask. The black veil in the story kind of shows that even the minister is putting up an act, and the veil could even represent like secret sins that everyone carries with them in their heart. And maybe this reverend has sinned and he can no longer honestly look anyone in the eye and doesn't even want them to look him in the face. Another way to look at it is this black veil could be seen as shame from his possible sins. And it's quite interesting if you look at it that way. And if you really think about it, everyone in their own way has their own black veil. They have their own mask that they put on in front of everyone. They have their own lies that they tell and their own sins, and that they know them deep in their heart.